The Vietnam War ended 50 years ago this week, but the legacy of 2 decades of war lives on. Millions of people continue to suffer the effects of Agent Orange, a chemical agent used by US forces. Priyanka Navani reports.
The people on this bus weren't alive during the Vietnam War, which ended 5 decades ago after Saigon fell to communist forces. But all of these people still feel the impact of the fighting, having been born with disabilities linked to Agent Orange, a herbicide left behind in huge amounts by U.S. forces.
The impacts on people in Vietnam have been primarily now in the second, third, possibly fourth generation. The consequence of birth defects and following and severe disabilities, both physical and mental disabilities.
This school in Da Nang, formerly home to a U.S. airbase, helps those with Agent Orange-related disabilities learn the alphabet, form sentences, and perform physical activities. It's a well-liked program, according to beneficiaries. I have many friends here, and I'm very happy, says this student. The U.S. has contributed some $155 million to support victims and cleanup projects in Vietnam. But as Washington continues to trim aid around the world, fears are rising that support for Agent Orange victims will disappear, and that could result in even more victims.
The Agent Orange disaster has brought pain and misery to about 4 million Vietnamese people. We always believe that the US government and the manufacturers of this toxic chemical must have the responsibility to support the victims.
50 years after the end of the war, Agent Orange continues to pose a threat to livelihoods and also seems to have a new victim: the close diplomatic relations that the U.S. and Vietnam have spent decades building. Priyanka Navani, TRT World.
Well, let's bring in Dr. Bharat Pankania, a senior clinical lecturer at Exeter University. He joins us live from the city of Bath here in the UK. Dr. Pankania, thank you very much for your time. We're talking here about 50 years after the end of the Vietnam War. As we heard from our report just moments ago, millions of Vietnamese are still suffering. How much of a threat does this Agent Orange still pose? Why and how, please?
So Agent Orange was a herbicide, and it was deployed to create deforestation. In other words, drop their leaves and remove the leaf cover. The process of making Agent Orange also makes dioxins, and it is these dioxins which are a almost forever chemical. In other words, they're there, they're persistent, and they persist for many, many decades. So as a result of manufacturing Agent Orange, a contaminant is also manufactured. That contaminant is dioxin, and it is that dioxin that persists in the environment, which continues to harm animals and humans and the land on which it is contaminating.
And there is, as our reporter explained, a massive cleanup effort underway. The US has provided financial support, financial assistance for those cleanup efforts, as well as disability support. But these are now threatened. Can you explain why?
Well, I understand that with the new president, he wishes to take a cutting knife to all aid programs and all manner of involvement of United States abroad. Now, this was land contamination by the USA, which the USA accepts. And the USA, since 2000, has finally been assisting the Vietnamese with the clear-up operation. And I hope that President Trump will not renege on what is a US responsibility for causing the contamination in the first instance. Because if that land remains contaminated, then we can continue to have not only ill health, but ill health amongst animals as well as plants. And this dioxin is bioaccumulative. In other words, you accumulate it in the fat in your body. And if you eat animals, then you're eating a little bit of dioxin as well. The animals who have been feeding on the land contaminated with the dioxin.
And Dr. Pankania, after decades spent building diplomatic relations between the US and Vietnam, how much of a risk is this now under right now?
Well, unfortunately, beggars cannot be choosers. Vietnam is not a rich, powerful nation, and Vietnam is bereft if the United States decides that it doesn't want to help Vietnam anymore. There is not much that Vietnam can do. And it is for these reasons that we should have international conventions on the use of such chemicals during war or at any other time. Because as a result, United States of America can just walk away from this with impunity because it is such a rich, powerful nation.
Dr. Pankania, we really appreciate your analysis there and your thoughts. Thank you very much for speaking to TRT World.
You're welcome.